Hello, welcome to Math for All, where we try to make math creative, curious, and inclusive for everyone. I'm Molly Vokey.
And I'm Heidi Subnani. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're really excited to have this conversation. If you would like, you can follow along with us on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook, any of those places. And if you're watching live, we do try and enter in comments as we go if we see them pop up. Or we'll check back later on all of those channels to try and answer questions or get you information from our guests as we can.
Yes. And we are going to be answering this question. Actually, I don't know if we are going to be answering it, but we hope that our guests are going to be able to answer it for us. And so we are talking about what happens when we contextualize math as political and racialized. So that is going to be a really interesting conversation with Anna Benderas and Dani Wadlington. And so I'm going to introduce them right now. Anna Benderas is a formerly undocumented educator organizer. Anna's story has led her to walk in purpose and commitment to a work rooted in ancestral knowledge and communal care. From teaching literacy in Indigenous communities to coaching teachers, Anna has abundant experience co-creating liberatory learning spaces. Anna knows how to make things happen. She is an innovator and a creator. With her experience working in schools and universities, she is most proud of her relentless effort to support the needs and rights of students and teachers of color. Dani Wadlington is a Black educator organizer born on the south side of Chicago. Dani had a transformative schooling experience from a very young age. South Shore Preschool was a home place for Dani as she experienced her people and her community's love. Since then, she has been on a journey of co-creating youth spaces to spark self-actualization and social change. As an expert in mathematics education, Dani has an MA in education, a master's in educational leadership, and a teaching and administration credential. She is a national leader and innovator in the work of anti-racist math instruction. Her proudest moments as an educator have been unionizing with her colleagues and supporting young people in critical thinking skills that lead to student-led direct action. So let's bring them in. Hello, ladies. Welcome.
Hello.
We're so glad to have you here. Let me take this down so that we can see who you are.
There you go. Excellent. We love to start off every show with the question, what is your math story? It just helps everyone know a little bit more about you and how you got into this work.
So I can start. I think I have always just been math. It's hard to say or hard to separate like my math story from my school story because for me, it's always been math. I've always loved math. My grandmother was a teacher. She taught fourth grade, but always had math. Like she really liked math. And so I've just always been really, really interested in math and really good at math. And I think there's lots of things I can share about my story in particular, but one thing I will share is that because I was so good at math and science too, I really got pushed into engineering, be an engineer. And I think that it was easy to do that because I went to a math and science academy even for high school, and but that's not my story. And I still stay with math, but there's so many things that you can do with math that's not just engineering. And so I think part of my story is figuring out like what are the ways that math intersects with my life, like not only as an educator but in all the things that I do.
So you tell us about the high school that you went to again?
So I went to Illinois Math and Science Academy. It's a private or not private, it's actually public, but it's a 3-year high school, so it's really cool. They really actually, when I was going there, they encourage you to do your freshman year at a traditional high school. And so it's a residential high school, so it's like a boarding school. You live there. And it was just a really unique experience. And And I really liked it. I had some of the coolest classes ever. That school had like a 3D printer before like hospitals had one. I don't know. There's just like a lot of technology. I had a lot of yeah. It was a really cool experience. And I learned a lot, not also just about math, about science, but about life. That's where I realized that I wanted to be a teacher, actually. So
were they encouraging you there to be to go into engineering, or were they more encouraging you to like do whatever you wanted to do?
I think they were encouraging to do whatever you wanted to do. I think that folks who don't identify with math or only think of math in terms of like engineering are like, oh, that's just what you do. You're good at math, you're good at science, you do engineering. That's it. That's the path, right? But I think that speaks to how we like in general don't always engage with math in ways that we like see ourselves in it.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I don't know. Tell us your story.
Yeah, so my story is very different from Dani. So whenever I tell people that I am a high school dropout, they like to correct me and say, no, you were pushed out, right? And like, I think that's true because I was pushed out by the systemic conditions. But I also like to say that I dropped out because it helps me reclaim the agency that I had when I chose to make that decision. I wasn't just passively pushed out, like I chose to leave school. And so, I like to think that now I was like a budding abolitionist at the time and didn't have that language. But and I had a constant make up to break up relationship with schooling. But through all that cycle, throughout all those cycles of back and forth, the fact that always remained was whenever I was in Mexico, I thrived in math classes. And whenever I was in the States, I did not. It was the opposite. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say interesting, but also like maybe just typical.
Yes.
Sadly.
That is a great response. Great response. And so, whatever, I grew up, did other things, and my friendship with Dani actually began because I made this comment about how like, ha ha ha, like I suck at math and you blah, blah, blah. And she was like, excuse me. She showed me this like 5,000 page long email breaking down why that was so problematic and how as a teacher I had the responsibility to encourage STEM. So we taught Latino students. Anyway, I read this letter and I was like, oh my God.
So were you guys working together at this time? How did that start?
So we met before we started working together. We met probably, I think it was in like 2010 maybe. So it's been a really long time. But we met through like friends at the time. And we really vibed. We were like, I don't know. We were just in my house and we were like, oh, there's something going on between me and her. Cause we had like met before, but we hadn't really connected. And that was like a really good time for us to connect. And we've just been connected ever since, not only through that friendship, but like in doing a lot of work. So she is one of the reasons why I came to that school. And so why I came to the school that we taught at together. And yeah, it was a really beautiful place. And we taught a lot of Latino kids, and that was the community. Like it was like there were only 400 students by the time the school was fully grown. She was actually a founding teacher for that school.
Oh, wow.
So I came on the second year. And so we've been doing work really in that capacity ever since then. But yeah, it was like, we can't do that. And it wasn't just her, it was a lot of like our leadership was like saying that, like I had, one of our administrators came into my classroom and was like, oh, you don't want me to sub this class. I said, I mean, maybe not, but not because you can't do math. Like you can't
attitude.
Right. Like, you can't like to just be okay in front of young people talking about how you're not good at math. You wouldn't do that in anything else. Like that's just not cool. Like why would you do that? Like I don't understand that. I mean, I get it in the sense that there's a lot of folks who don't see themselves in math, like I said before, but like it's one thing to not see yourself, which hurts my heart, but it's another to reject it. That's a whole different level that, you know, it hurts. It hurts me even more. But what you're not gonna do is come in my classroom as an adult and spew that. I don't play that. That's not. We can have that. We can have a private conversation about that.
Okay. So she got you in.
Yeah. So Anna, did your experience with math change after that? Well, at least in the U.S., because you were having a positive experience in Mexico. So did that change here in the U.S. after that?
What it actually did is that it pushed me to unpack my journey with schooling overall. And part of my story at the time, and part of where the origin of my of that comment, of that self-deprecating like anti-math comment, came from my insecurities around not doing well in schooling. And because with the humanities, which is what I ended up majoring in, well, you know, since 7th grade, when I was stitching school, like other kids were like doing all kind of stuff. I was at the library, like reading Asada Shakur and Malcolm X, and like learning like true, like great things, right? Like really educating myself, but I never did math or science. So in humanities, I was more than secure, but it was the math and science that I was always like, well, the last time I engaged with this was in 6th grade. So I felt ignorant. And so I realized that like so many of us feel that way. So it helped me unpack my relationship with schooling and reclaim and really own my relationship with learning, right? Which was my relationship with learning is a really, really beautiful story. My relationship with schooling, not so much. So it was great. And, you know, you bring in a person to your job just to have them scold you. And so, but it was so good because, you know, they say like extroverts recruit their introvert friends. That was the moment when I was like, she will be my friend for real. Yeah, that was a turning point.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So Dani, good work converting her to our side. We need her.
I do. And it's cool because like I feel like we have very different, like when we talk about our math stories in and of themselves are very different, but also how we engage in the work that we do, it like is also very different. And I think that like we are stronger as a team when we bring those different like unique experiences in. Like I think right, like growing up in the States versus growing up in Mexico, the way you learn math, the way you do school, the way education is really different. So we get to bring those like cultural experiences with math into our work. We also get to bring the experiences in as a student who like loved math and a student who didn't like see themselves in math, right? And then we get to see it as like, I don't know, we just get to see it from these like unique perspectives that allow us to really think about all the different ways in which everyone like engages in math. And I don't think I would have that experience without, you know, working with Anna.
Well, it's very funny. I think we're aligned literacy math according to these pictures. So our experiences are very
math major and Heidi was an English major. So
yay.
We'll talk when we answer our question. We'll talk about why that. We'll talk about that.
Well,
yes, let's get into it.
This is how it generally works, right? We start talking about you, and then it just leads right into the main question. So, what happens when we contextualize math as political and racialized?
I want Dani to name like. I'm going to let Dani name some reasons, but like before, I kind of want to like reframe this question a little bit, because really it's like what happens when we do this, but it's also like what happens when we don't. And I feel like doing this, like contextualizing math as political and racialized, seems like this like, oh, like this is a new unique thing that we could integrate, but like no, like what happens when you don't do that is like a really important question for any math practitioner. Like that's beyond a niche of interest. Like it's something. What happens when we don't do this is a question that every mathematician that's trying to be an agent of change has to contend with. But I'll let Dani share her.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think you have to explore that question of when we don't, because that is what's happening right now. And then we're always like, well, why do we have this outcome? And why do we have this outcome? And why do we try this thing that doesn't work? Like, and I think it's because we're not taking that unique lens of like, I don't know if unique's not the right word, but we're not taking that lens of like, math is political, math is racialized. It is. We live in a racialized society. There's nothing that exists in this society that is not racialized. Like you can't pull it. And of course there's intersections. Of course there's like different ways to view things. But if you do not take a racialized point of view and do not look at it or critically analyze it through that lens, you will miss something.
But it's funny that you say it's not unique, but I think it is. I think that's why you're doing the work that you're doing, is because it is unique and it needs to be more broad.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I wonder, so when I was thinking about this question, when we bring up, I think, that math is political and racialized, it is, but people, I'm stereotyping here, people choose to not see that, right? Like, so we choose to bury our heads and say, well, it's not political, or it's not. When others are using their mathematical understanding or their knowledge or to gerrymander or to like set up algorithms that look at particular types of people, or math is being used in ways that are political and racialized, whether or not you admit to that happening.
And that's not just education, that's in the world, right?
Yeah, in the world. So, calling it out makes people uncomfortable. But
you don't say.
But I also think that and I think that there are people who can look at it and say, like, of course, the way we use math might be racialized, or the way we use math might be political, but like people don't understand that, like, even if we didn't use it in those ways, it still exists in that way, because the way that math is discovered or exists in the world is shaped by like how our communities in the past like viewed that, right? And so it's more than just how we use math is racialized, how we use math is political. It's like, what is the number 0? What does the number 1 mean? That in and of itself is racialized and political, right? Like, why does this symbol where there's a vertical line that we call vertical and a horizontal line that we call horizontal, why is that a plus? What about the fields of math where you literally create fields where you determine what the value of a number or the value of the symbol is, right? So I think that like there's so much more to like, you're right with how it's used, but also just in the way we conceptualize math is often racialized.
But it's interesting too, because even you just bringing that up, Heidi and I go to a lot of math conferences, and we have this friend Sunil Singh. I don't know if you guys know him, but he's amazing, and he's a storyteller, and several other people that we know also into the history of mathematics. And I was a math major. I'm not going to tell you that I know anything about the history of mathematics. I mean, I do know a little bit now, and some people that did things that are named after them, but really you don't learn that. You don't learn that. Even as a math major, for me, I didn't learn any of that. So
I have an argument as to why.
Okay, well, I'm relate to this question.
The reason you don't learn that is because we don't contextualize math as racialized and political. So the work, I'll break that down. The work that Dani and I do argues that all mathematics is ethnomathematical. Like, it's ethnomathematics. There is no such thing as non-ethnomathematics. All mathematics is informed by culture. All of it. I'll provide 2 examples. So, as an example, when I say geometry, what shapes do you think of?
I go with circles, but
I definitely think of like pentagons and triangles and.
Same. I'm a triangle squares, quadrilaterals.
like sharp edges or perfect circles, right? When I asked this question in Ethiopia, the majority of my students thought of honeycombs and fractals. Okay. There is one example is there's a native indigenous group in Brazil called the Polycore people. They do polycore geometry, which has nothing to do with sharp edges. It's all waves, lines, and circular things. Why does that make more sense? Is because life is circular wave-like, right? Like physics, all physics things are wave-like, sound, light, air, everything is waves, everything is circular, leaves, right? There are no real sharp edges in nature, which makes sense as to why our ancestors and indigenous people in the past were so advanced at astronomy, because their geometry was wave-like, circular, and like reflected more of the nature's shapes. But Western math, for whatever reason, adopted sharp edges. That's one way in which like culture shapes the way we approach math, not just how we use it, but the way that we approach math. Geometry that is sharp is not like an intrinsic thing, that it's a choice that a culture made to adopt that approach to geometry.
So do you, just because now I'm so curious, why did we do that? What were we using it for, that it needed to be sharp edges and whatever? Now I'm only picturing maps and figuring out the shortest distance, like all the nerdy stuff that they do in geometry.
My argument is that it's because that's what the Greeks were using, and so like the West adopted white people's cultures. They didn't adopt, which is the same reason why we use the calendar that we use, the Augustinian. I don't know how you say that in English, Augustinian calendar. But whereas like the Maya calendar is like off by it's like it's one of the most accurate, and like the Maya are like the only people who have like a calendar for like Jupiter. We have like a solar calendar, a lunar calendar, right? A calendar of events, like almost like a way to like record history calendar, like calendars that we won't even think of like as calendars, and it's like super accurate. But like we chose the Augustinian one. Why? Like because that's what like the white cultures, Western cultures were using, right? Why did we adopt the Indian 0 versus like the Kemetic 0 or the Maya 0? Or why didn't we like merge the best of all the worlds, right? So all of these ways in which we understand like math as intrinsic are not actually intrinsic. They were choices made by Western culture to adopt. Not all of them have a logical reason. Some of the reasons for those choices are ethnic, like ethno, rather than mathematical, right? Have to do with culture. They have to do with like proximities to cultures, rather than like this makes logical, mathematical, scientific sense. So that's just one illustration of how math is informed by culture and is already political and racialized.
Well, and I wonder like when those things develop, because and then this is like a complete tangent and I have no actual clue about what I'm about to ask. So like what I think about that, with like the Mayan pyramids in Guatemala, or like those then do adopt edges to a certain extent. And so they're building, when I was there, like, but I also think about like, that just reminded me, like in Western culture, we think of 13 as bad, but like all of the pyramids, according to the guy that when I lived there, who was telling me, like were built on 13th. So it's like that idea of like things that we're like, oh no, are like do not hold the same significance in other places, or hold significance for a very different reason. And it's just interesting in that way. Look at that.
I'm not an expert in pyramids, but I can my small argument feeling is that the pyramid shapes had a lot more to do with trigonometry and algebra than it did with geometry.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because Maya geometry is more circular. They probably leaned more on trig and algebra than they did on geometry. at least in the way that the Maya used it.
Yeah. No, I mean, that would make sense, but
Oh, gosh.
That zero was pivotal in the building of the pyramids, because the pyramids were complete response to their astronomical findings. And astronomical findings were contingent on the zero that was used as a placeholder to mark their calendar days, which is what they used to build the pyramids, and so on and so forth.
Oh my gosh, so much. It is, right? It's so much to think about. It's especially where you guys all seem like you've lived. I don't know about you, Dani, but these ladies have definitely lived in other places and experienced much more culture than I have. And so my math experience is pretty limited to the United States. I mean, I am trying to do some work so that I can experience other cultures, but it's amazing that there can be such blinders to all of it.
It's just not even something that we discuss in many spaces. So the only reason that honestly that math history interests me is because of the humanities side of my life. Like I find that okay, yes, like this is my, I'm all about like figuring out why young kids learn math and what, but like post algebra 1, I really don't care. Then I know.
Dani's gonna get you. Well, Dani's gonna get you.
She said that, that's not her thing. She didn't say it wasn't important, so I'm all good.
Right, no, it's still important.
I just leave that to someone else.
Yeah, like to like really love it. Like I'm like so curious about how kids learn and all of that, and like the mathematics of the elementary and middle school grade, like all of that, very interesting to me. But like the history aspect of it, like that, I mean, I have a mind like zero time on.
Oh, me too.
Like mathematics history, and I'm Indian. Like, should have at least learned about zero. It's like those kind of things. I shouldn't be learning that in my 40s, like by reading a book.
Why not? It's never too late. We'll learn more when our book comes out. We're gonna write.
Oh, book! What? Tell us.
Yes, we're gonna write about all of this.
Excellent.
When is it coming out? That's amazing.
Hopefully soon. That's a project that we've been working on. That and like how do we tell our math stories through like a historical and cultural experience, and so it'll be a really cool project when it's finished.
Oh, please keep us informed.
Yeah, keep us informed.
That is something we would love to share with people, because I mean, as we've illustrated today, there's certainly not enough of that in the classroom, and we would love to be able to share that with people.
Well, and having students be able to see themselves in the mathematics. I think that's the thing. For my elementary years, we lived in a place that was very diverse. And so I was not the only kid, who came from a family of color and all of those kind of things. So it was, unlike high school, which we were the only brown family for miles. It was those, but that still wasn't there. Like the ability to see yourself in the mathematics that is there. So to circle back to your question, when we do contextualize and, point at math out as political, as racialized, I have an idea of how well that goes over, but what does happen when you've experienced that in your own lives?
So I think for us, like, I feel like I'll speak for me. My experience with that is very similar to kind of like what you were saying, Molly. I feel like I saw myself in math not because the content was cultural or the content was that, but I had experience where it was like, you can do math. Like, I feel like a lot of folks come into it like, oh, math is hard. We have a lot of teachers who, don't do math. And so math is this thing that feels like very inaccessible for a lot of folks. And for me, it wasn't. And I think it wasn't because I just came from that, like, I just came from a place where it was like, everybody's going to be excellent at everything. And that's just how it is. And you can do this and it's cool. So I never felt like, oh, this subject isn't for me, or, oh, this isn't for me. And it was once I got older and being like, wait, people don't, like, what do you mean people don't do this? Or like, actually it was like in 6th grade and they tried to put me in like regular English and low math. And I was like, first of all, what is this? Why do you have 4 levels in middle school? Why is there low, regular, like high and advanced? Why are there 4 levels? That's nonsense.
Oh,
but
regular.
Like, me, low, regular. I don't play into those things, but if you're gonna have them, Dani Wadlington is not in low or regular anything. Like, what do you mean? I need to take on the advanced because that's just where I'm at. And I think that just comes from like, you know, being in a space where no one told me I couldn't do anything. Like I just was like built to, and I had like, you know, everybody was like, that's just what you're going to do. And if you're not good at something, that's okay. Like, you know, it was never like a thing. So I didn't understand that. My mom was like, absolutely not, advocated for me. They were like, well, we're going to put her down if she doesn't have good grades. And of course I was in advanced classes and did fine. But I think like that was the first time where I like had this moment of like, oh, people don't see me in this, but I've always seen myself in it. So I feel like that's where me seeing myself in math like came from. I didn't realize that I saw it until other people didn't see it in me. And so that's where like my connection comes from. So for me, of course, while trying to like make math more cultural and think about that, I feel like where I'm really good at is like having students see themselves in the ability of math, or having them see themselves in like access to really strong math. And trying to build like that way. And I feel like I want to be mindful of that, because as I'm saying that, it feels like I'm sort of like playing into structures that already exist. And I think that that can be problematic at times. And so I don't want folks listening to be like, oh, you know, Dani said that it was okay to like just increase access or things like that, because it's so much more nuanced and bigger than that. But for me, I know what it feels like to like, or I don't really know what it feels like to not be a part of math. And I hear that from folks, and I try really hard in my classroom, and I try really hard to make it so that students do see themselves not only in like this culture, not only in like a cultural way of math, but also just in the math classroom, in access to math and things like that. So that's like one approach for me personally that I try to do, especially in my classroom. Like I always start off the year, I'm like, look, the math can be hard, so class is not going to be hard. You got to talk to me if we need to go slower, if we need to go faster, if we need to try it a different way. Things like that I think are really, really important too to math instruction. So like not only just the content, but how we engage students in math is really, really important. And I think that like and I guess this is the part, right? Because how we engage folks with math is usually how we were engaged in math. And a lot of us grew up in ways that are like, that does not work for the majority of people. So like we have to really make sure that like when we say, you know, that we want students to also see themselves in math, we have to think about how we're running our classrooms, how students have choice, how they have agency, how we don't give them like 50,000 practice problems to do and say, okay, do them all. And even if you understand it after the first 2, making them do it for the next 10 times, just cause like, what is that? You know, like really thinking about what are the ways in which we sort of engage in math too, that are like also like cultural. How do we talk about math? What does discourse look like? What does that mean for students who speak different languages? What does that mean for students who speak the same language in very different ways? You know, I think that like there's so much to think about too, in addition to the content of math. That's really important.
Agreed. No, I mean, this is the kind of work that Heidi and I do as we go into schools and we work with teachers on how to improve their pedagogy and how to be inclusive and how to get student thinking to be the forefront of their classroom. And I really feel strongly that getting student thinking out there is the best way for kids to experience math, not just for that kid whose thoughts are out there, but for every kid in that classroom who's hearing that thought. Who cares what I think?
Yeah.
Right? I already freaking know it. So
I think another thing that happens when we contextualize math as the political racialized discipline that it is that we will inevitably like find ourselves wanting to teach it and to engage in it in an interdisciplinary way, because that's how our ancestors did it. You know, like the African concept of numbers came inspired by religious and spiritual thought, and it came out of a need out of agriculture, and it was used to grow in technology and medical technology, especially, right? Even like the Indian zero, right? Like, so in Sanskrit, the word Sundya means zero, which is where the concept of Sundiata comes from, which is tied to that state of nirvana, of like non-attachment. It's a place of zero. It's a place of neutrality where you're not super high and you're not super low, right? So like all these numbers have religious implications, are inspired by religion, are informed by science, are informed by agriculture and business and community rules and traditions and rituals and dance and art and blah 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 blah, right? Fractals in African culture have everything to do with architecture, and that informs government. The idea that we can separate the disciplines is the whitest thing in the world. It's the westernmost whitest thing, and it's the most colonial thing, because it makes disciplines like math product oriented, and removes all responsibility from mathematicians and scientists to contend with like ethical issues around why they're using the math. The reason you said, Molly, that you've never heard of this, of any history in math in your math major, is because of this. Because when you ask a question about math history, they're going to be like, well, this isn't a history class. If you bring up an issue of ethics, and well, this isn't an ethics class, right? If you bring up an issue of like how God,
I never even thought of asking any questions like that.
Well, this happened when I tried to take classes.
That's why you didn't do well in math.
Exactly.
You were asking these crazy questions for.
Exactly. You know, and like, how do you deal with physics without asking religious questions? Like, how? You know, you have to be just really just memorizing the stuff and trying to survive the course, to not be moved to ask questions from spirituality when you're talking about the speed of light, and the fact that when we look at stars, we're actually looking at like stars that don't even exist anymore because time has passed, they're gone, and we can still see them billions of years later. Like all of that stuff is like philosophical, right? And it's I feel like that's why you have all this technology that is void of ethical questioning, right? This interdisciplinary thing, that's a political move, right? We have to understand that that is a political move that has political impacts. And who does it affect? People of color the most, right? And that's why it's racialized.
Well, and I wonder too, I feel like, particularly from maybe like a British colonial and then by proxy an American issue, I feel like this is even more of an issue in the US because of how our system, I mean, like we're coming from a more or less a British colonial kind of background. And then while there were many other colonizers from Europe, like they tended to at least connect art and music and literature and math a little bit more. Not a lot, but a little bit. But, you know, British system much more separate, and then we inherit and built on that, I think, in the United States, and we like turned it into this like productivity like factory above all other things, right? Like, so I'm going to be about the capitalist, but all of those structures that we've created only amplify that separation even more. Like, it's really hard to have that conversation about interdisciplinary work with math teachers. Like
because they've never seen it any other way.
Right. Even with like science, like STEM. I mean, I have people who like get the heebies like thinking about just like, oh, STEM, like where we integrate, and then they're like, well, then math just plays second fiddle to the science. And like, I mean, there's all of those things. And I'm like,
how about we use math for this, not just for the sake of doing math? How about we use math for something?
Right. Yeah. And I'm okay with like, you love the beauty of math and you just want to like mathematize it out. Like, okay, but like consider the poetry in that, consider like the art in that, consider all of the other pieces of, but we just know it has to be this and it's going to stay over here and not be touched by, not be contaminated by like the softer sciences or any of those other, and we do that like as a field like that. Those are systems that we continue, that we've decided that math is elite and only for some.
So I hate it.
And like, those systems just continue and continue. But I don't know. I feel like it's
even in our own math world, it's that way, Heidi.
Yeah.
Definitely more superiority than.
Yes.
Well, whatever. I mean,
it's predominantly male and white and
yeah. And I think that like it is that, and right, like our systems don't support like the changing of it, and in fact exacerbate it, right? Like math is math is like the only subject in high school that is not grade level. Like when people are like, yo, what grade do you teach? I'm like, well, I got 9th through 12th graders all in the same class, right? And first of all, that can be beautiful. But I think because we have this like rigid thing, like if I did want to collaborate with if I wanted to collaborate with the science teacher, I got to collaborate with a bio teacher, a chem teacher, a physics teacher, and I don't know, whatever, life sciences, whatever the other, whatever the other sciences are. And like, what if they're an AP? What if they're this? And so I think the system also, like, I feel like one, we've made math elite, which then leads to folks being able to engage with math and folks not being able to engage with math, and then us expecting that, and then us being okay with people failing math or not moving through math.
Not only okay, but like actually, I mean,
putting barriers up.
We've all said it today, right? That there are people who are not math people, and they're very happy to say that, but nobody is going to go into a classroom and be like, I'm not an English person.
Right.
I don't even speak English. Like, what? No,
yeah. So I think that like,
even if you don't speak English, you work your damnedest to speak English. Like, hello. I don't know.
Yeah. It's just, it all continues to get reinforced and compounded and compounded and compounded. And we just expect, I mean, I've been out of school where, in California, we have these like A through G requirements in order to like graduate. I have an issue with how the colleges dictate every single decision that happens in high schools, but that's
also, yes,
you girl.
Different conversation. But I mean, schools will be like, all right, we want to get our kids to college or whatever, so our graduation requirements are going to be A through G, except for math. It like blows my mind that like we systemically and structurally also devalue math. And then what that does is it allows for that culture of math to like not be as important, not only systemically, but that just carries down into all of our experiences, and it just continues to reinforce these like silly notions around math that have higher impacts for students of color, and it just continues and continues and continues. So it's like, we got to deal with our content. We got to deal with how we teach students. We have to deal with like the systemic barriers and structural things that allow for this culture to thrive. Like there's so much, but we're doing our part in that work.
Yay.
Well, speaking of, like, we want to give people an opportunity to hear more about the work that you're doing, but that's one of the ways that I first came across your work. And I'm not sure if it was a webinar during pandemic, Dani, that you were on, or someone recommended your website, and then I found the work that you're doing there. So maybe if both of you could talk a little bit about the work that you do and the resources that you provide, and that would be great.
So we have a really cool workshop series. It's a 6-session series where we unpack this very question, but more than that, we talk about how. So less of like why, definitely why, because it's us. But we talk about how, in each session goes into one way, one lens, one framework, and then we always like end the session with like putting it into practice in an immediately applicable way. And so it's a really cool workshop session. We've gotten like the best comments. I think of like all our work, this one gets like the best comments, because like we had a teacher once who was like, he was just like staring in this camera, and I was like, "Are you okay?" He was like, "Everything you just said makes me realize I just have to completely change the way I teach, like overall."
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's the point.
Like, yay. Or like somebody else was like, "Oh my God, honestly, like I've hated teaching math up to now, but like I feel rejuvenated. Like I have this like really new cool way of like how to teach it." So it's a really cool workshop series. We do have second edition. The first edition is like really into like the principles that make math really awesome and like anti-racist, and we say it's anti-racist, but in reality we're just trying to unpack math and make it accessible for cultures beyond just the Western culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second edition gets more into like the actual math of it and the actual like teaching math in different ways. We like unpack different ways of arriving to arithmetic, different ways to algebra, different rules on like, for example, like don't over scaffold, teach efficiency, just things like, it's just so exciting. I'm gonna get into it, but it's really cool. So the workshop series are like.
And can people find them here?
Yes, so that's our website. We and that's where you'll find like information on our math services. We also have a lot of other services too. We have an anti-Blackness PD trilogy series, which is really, really cool. We talk about how anti-Black racism, how it was conceptualized, how it continues to happen, how it's perpetuated, how we're all engaging in it and need to stop right now. So it's cool. PD trilogy series that we have. We have some other workshop series around anti-racist education. And then we do our other big service is anti-racist consultation services, which we sort of identify an issue of racism and that's happening at your school or your district, and we walk you through a plan to make some changes around that. And so we do a lot of cool work. We've done some customized work too. So if you have an issue and you want to come to us and talk it out, we might be able to help you out in other ways as well.
And the best way to get to us is to go to this website, and on there you can link, you can book a call, like a free discovery call, just to see how we would fit into, and if we like you, because we're not just going to work with just anybody, you got to show that you're about it.
No, that is the thing. Like, I will say, they're not your people if you just want to rubber stamp what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're not willing.
You don't give those out. You gotta
they're not like gonna come. No, that's not what they're gonna do. If you're actually about the work,
don't get that through us. We'll get that somewhere else.
And don't try to play it neither. Don't use all the language, because we know and we can ask you the right questions. You come to us when you're ready. And if you feel like maybe I'm not ready yet, but I'm getting there, let us know and we'll check in with you later.
We'll help you get ready. We'll help you get ready.
Yeah.
No.
Well, thank you guys so much for the work that you're doing and for coming on this show and sharing your stories and telling us about all the work that you're doing.
No, thank you for having us. This was so much fun. I always try to not bore people with these math conversations, just like we're at the gym. So it's nice to have a venue.
Get it?
Yes.
Get it.
We totally understand that. That is like this is the space for that.
Right. Exactly. All right, ladies, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. All right. Wow, that was so fun. So fun.
great resources there too on their website.
Yeah, definitely go to their website. It's a very professional and beautiful website. So
yeah, and easy to find the resources that you need, etc. So
yes. Our next show is on January 25th, and we're going to be interviewing Pam Harris. So we're super excited about that. And until then,
keep math creative, curious, and inclusive for everyone. Good night.
Bye.